final audit committee meeting of the 24-25 school year. It's June 16th, 2025, and we are here with our auditors from R.S. Abrams. And with that, they have been on site with us for a little bit, I think in the past week or two, and so they're gonna fill us in on what's going on. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Brendan Nelson. I'm a partner at R.S. Abrams. Joining me today is Chris Schneider. He is also a partner at R.S. Abrams, so we both are assigned to your account this year. I was on the account last year, so Chris is kind of shadowing me this year to bring him into the fold. But as always, you'll have that two-partner comfort on your account. So as mentioned, we're here today. We did put together a brief PowerPoint to talk through the audit process, the timeline, some of the procedures that we're going to be looking into throughout the year. A good portion of which we have already done. As mentioned, we were here on Monday, so we were in Kathy and Jessica's hair, kind of picking their brains, asking for some documents, Donna as well. So without further ado, we'll dive right in.
Oh, it's on your laptop.
So I'll advance it.
Yep, perfect. Thank you, Kathy. So just a quick agenda for the PowerPoint here. So we're going to touch on our audit methodology. As I mentioned, the audit timeline. We'll touch on each report that will ultimately be issued at completion of the audit. And then lastly, we are going to touch on, unfortunately, we do have another new accounting standard that will need to be implemented this year, as well as a future one that will be applicable for next year. So we're going to touch on those as well. All right, so same as any other given year, we do break down our entire audit process essentially into 4 phases. So there's a planning phase, a control evaluation phase where we're looking at your internal controls. The substantive testing phase is when we come back at year end in August when the books are closed and we start diving into those account balances. And then the completion phase is typically, that's us back at the office completing all of our audit documentation, wrapping up any loose ends, and then developing and creating those financial statements for the district. So I'm not going to go into too much detail here because on the next few slides, we're going to go into all the procedures that fall into each of these categories. So we can jump ahead to the next. Flip this over here. All right, so typically May, June timeframe. Again, a lot of this has been done already as this is considered our interim work, so we were here on Monday. But some of the things that we do look at, so we do conduct, before even coming out on site to the audit, we do conduct what's called an internal brainstorming meeting essentially. So whoever's going to be on the audit from our firm, we meet internally. We're going to discuss any nuances of the district. We talk about any hurdles or hiccups that we may have come across in the prior year to make sure that we're aware. All those things get factored into our audit approach for that next year. So we've already done that. We look at preliminary analytical procedures. So again, we're looking at things that are happening in the industry, things that we know, the environment, where interest rates at, things like that. Anything that we can incorporate into our preliminary analytics to kind of develop what our expectations are. So, if interest rates are going up, we're going to expect your interest income to go up this year. So that's something that we'll develop. We do that for a lot of your major account classes to kind of come up with what we think, where we think things are going to shift this year. And then if they shift opposite of that, that's when we reach out to the district to try and get some more insight as to why that may have happened. Again, there's a lot of documentation that goes into this. So our planning phase of the audit, we're completing a lot of checklists. Our professional standards require us to complete numerous amounts of checklists and audit programs, things like that. So we are working on that now. Once we do finally come out on site, we are interviewing multiple people at the district within certain departments. We're gaining an updated understanding of the controls that are in place. We want to see if anything's changed from the prior year. Has there been turnover in any areas? All those things get factored into our audit approach. We do also do what's called a walkthrough. So this is essentially any major area, whether it's cash disbursements, payroll, cash receipts, capital assets. So we're going to basically ask for a walkthrough of that transaction from start to finish. So based on discussions that we've had, you're telling us what controls are in place. The walkthrough is our way of verifying that those controls are effectively operating as intended and that they are happening. We do also, as I mentioned, we're going to look at the prior year's reports, mainly the management letter, to see what recommendations we may have had in the prior year. We want to get a status update on those, see if there's been any changes, if things have been corrected. If you do recall, it was just a couple of minor things last year. I think with extra classroom, there were some issues with some lacking signatures, as well as some of the disbursements to the invoices for them not being stamped paid. I can give you a quick update on that, again, because we did do a lot of that testing already on Monday. So we did see that the invoices were being stamped paid, which is great. And we didn't have any issues, as far as we know right now, with any missing signatures. So again, we'll verify all that, but just to give you a quick update there. We can jump ahead to the next slide. So again, lots of other documents that we're also looking at throughout the year. We're looking at all of your Board of Ed minutes. We're looking for anything of financial significance that could have an impact on your financial statements. Any audit committee minutes, which, we'll be looking at these as well, obviously. We're looking at your policies. Have there been any new policies put in place? Any changes? There's the laws and regulations are constantly changing in terms of what policies you need to have in place. So we're looking at those. Any reports that are going to the board, typically we'll look at a sample of those monthly financial reports that go to the board. We want to make sure that they're getting everything that they should be in terms of, your trial balances, revenue reports, treasurer's reports, things of that nature. Any financial reports, obviously, so we're looking at your internal auditor reports, claims auditor reports. If there is any reports from the state, I believe you guys are in the process of wrapping up an OSC report right now, which is great. Those are all things that we do look at to consider. If they had any recommendations in there, we're factoring that into our audit approach. A little redundant, but we do communicate, as we mentioned earlier, with your internal and claims auditors. So we do some questionnaires with them. We want to know if they're aware of anything that they feel we should be aware of that we should incorporate. And then ultimately, we're compiling all this to develop what our audit approach is going to be this year. So that's how we get to that point. We can jump ahead. I'm going to try to turn this page the right way. Okay, so depending on the year, we may choose to essentially rely on the effectiveness of your controls in a certain area. Typically, we shy away from that just because of the nature of the year-end procedures that we're constantly doing. It's not really necessary to rely on controls, but that is something that we consider each year. So if we are relying on controls, sometimes that can alleviate some of the year-end testing if we can prove that those controls are operating effectively. As any other year, we're always sending out third-party confirmations. So we send these out to your banking institutions, to your legal counsel, and then we send related party confirms to certain members of management, to the board and the audit committee members. These are questionnaires, again, that go directly from us to them, where they're able to basically report anything that they're aware of that we may need to consider. We have already, as I mentioned earlier, started the audit of the extra classroom activity funds. We did most of our substantive testing, but come year end, we'll do additional testing over the year-end bank recs and the summary of your club's activities. So that's still in process. We also we were able to start working on your single audit. So this is that federal audit that you guys are required to have every year over your federal grants and compliance over those grant funds. So we did begin working on that. I believe for this year, we're testing the special education cluster, if I'm not mistaken. So I think the goal is, as we did last year, to issue both your financial statements and the single audit together again, barring no hiccups with completing that single audit. All right, at this point, we're getting into year end. I'm going to turn it over to Chris. He's going to talk about, again, when we come in at year end after the books have been closed, and then bringing that to completion with the financials.
Sounds good. So again, now we're on the July and August slides. In terms of what we're doing, it's a lot of the same, what Brendan mentioned before, as well as some additional items, what we call substantive audit procedures. So on top of looking at controls further and getting updates on that as compared to interim, we're looking at year-end close, we're looking at additional receipts and disbursements, and then again, ultimately being able to opine and issue reports, which we'll get into, about your financial statements, whether or not they're fairly stated, and us giving a reasonable assurance on that. On top of that, we're looking at analytics, which is again looking at year-over-year fluctuations, looking at expectations versus actuals. Brendan had mentioned that we do preliminary analytics where we try to develop expectations, think about industry trends, operations of the district, et cetera, to see where we think things will fall out. As long as things are falling out where we think they might be, we're good. If not, then we have discussions with the district, look at support, try to understand what happened and why, and whether it suggests that the financial statements are fairly stated. And then lastly, as we mentioned a couple of times, we're looking at your extra classroom activity funds, again, because there is a requirement from the state to issue a separate standalone report on those and to give a separate opinion on that. Moving on to the next slide. This is exciting. All right.
I got turned around a few times with that.
the double-sided printed. A beautiful thing, but difficult. All right, so moving on to September and October, we do something called a subsequent events review. So the idea here is you have a June 30th year ends. In the period between your year end and the issuance of financial statements, to the extent that there's anything material that the reader should be aware of, that the taxpayer should be aware of, we would consider that and potentially disclose it in the financial statements, especially as it relates to estimates. So again, if you make an estimate as of a point in time and significant changes happen from year end to October 15th roughly, that might change some of what's disclosed there. I'm gonna skip over the last things here because I'll talk about the deliverables specifically, but long story short, after our testing in July and August, in September and October, we're compiling our deliverables, including the financial statements and some other items, and ultimately presenting to you and to the board, and then ultimately you send these reports up to the state. So we'll then move on to the October 2025 slide. So again, as you can see from the prior schedule and from the meeting that we have now, we meet with the audit committee. We talked about the draft financial statements. We get a signed management representation letter from the district, which means it's a letter that the district signs, just alluding to the fact that everything we've gotten is fairly stated. Everything that they're reporting is okay. There's nothing that's not being disclosed, et cetera. And then lastly, like I said, we meet with the Board of Ed. So if you go to the next slide, which is reports to be issued. Again, this is going to be reiterating a lot of what we've talked about, but there's a variety of reports that are required by the state and then some by the federal government that we are giving you at the end of the audit that we'll ultimately talk about in October. The first two items here are opinions on your primary district financial statements. The first being just what I would call a regular opinion. The second being one that's required per government auditing standards. So again, because you're receiving federal monies, because you're a public school district, you have this second opinion. There are certain procedures that we do because of the second opinion, including a lot of the controls testing that Brendan mentioned before. Third bullet point on this slide is that federal single audit. So again, the federal funds that you're getting, inclusive of the special education grants, but also your child nutrition monies, your title grants, some of those COVID monies that have come in prior years, that's all going to be included in there. And again, we'll be ultimately opining on that. And then lastly, the independent report on the extra classroom activity funds. So again, while the extra classroom activity funds are part of your primary financial statements, the state does require us to do this separate audit. So that's why we're bringing up some of those observations that Brendan mentioned in the past on that. Lastly, in terms of things that get communicated to you, there's something called the management letter. Brendan alluded to some of the recommendations there. It's, again, findings and recommendations around controls, where we're offering recommendations and the district is then being asked to implement those recommendations. And then lastly here, the board governance letter. So this is just auditing standards requiring us to communicate certain items to you. I won't go through those in detail here, but when we talk to you in October, we will go through those all as needed. So before I move on to the exciting stuff here, the new government auditing standards, anybody have any questions for us? All right, so coming to our last slide of substance before we can talk about the top 10 to the extent that you want to. There's two new government auditing standards that we think will be material to the district and just worth noting and talking about here. GASB 101, the first one here is about compensated absences. That is effective this year. When we were on site the other day, we were talking about that actively. We will be working through the implementation of that to hopefully have some, be able to report on any changes that are warranted for the district at year end. And then the second one is GASB 103, second bullet point here, that's effective for next year. So starting with compensated absences, the one that's effective for this year. Compensated absences are your accrued sick, vacation, and personal time. You've always had this liability on your financial statements. You sometimes have a fund level liability, which means it would affect your general fund. That's the voter adopted budget fund that probably almost keen on talking about. Then there's your long-term liability. That's on your government-wide financial statements. Again, in the most PC way, it's not something that you're worried about particularly, but it is a long-term liability of the district and it is required to be reported by GASB. Long story short, in terms of the changes in the guidance, previously you would have calculated a liability based on what you believe to be more likely than not paid out to a person leaving the district. A nuance now is not only are you doing that piece of it, but GASB has also asked you to calculate a more likely than not amount to be used in future years. So said another way, if I, as an individual at the district, have earned 10 days and I'm able to then roll that into a future year, the district would be calculating a liability, essentially saying what is the likelihood that I would use some of those days in future years.
In
So
the
again,
form of PTO.
in the form of, in the form of PTO. So again, I will never be actually directly paid for these days like you would be upon a retirement and somebody has accumulated sick days. This is just saying, at a point in time, I've accumulated days, June 30th, 2025. What do we think that an individual will use going forward? So again, there's some reports coming out of the accounting information system that we're going to utilize, work with the district, try to analyze, and again, just apply an additional incremental percentage here. So again, of note, this statement is changing your government-wide financial statements. It is not changing your general fund, your fund level. So that's important to note.
Doesn't affect the budget at all.
Will not affect the budget. And then another notable thing here where we're, again, waiting for the state to opine. I'm not sure that we will get an answer and any sort of meaningful timeline, but you have an employee benefit accrued liability reserve, which historically has been used to accumulate monies to be able to pay for these compensated absence payouts. With this change in the liability, we are expecting for most districts that your liability will go up. Most districts were funding their reserve up to the amount of that liability. We are not expecting the state to want people to increase their reserve funding commensurate with that increase in the liability. The idea being that EBLR reserve is to be used for payout of days. That second incremental piece that I mentioned has nothing to do with an actual payout of days, and so they're not recommending that you increase to that amount. So just be mindful of that when you start to talk about reserve funding at year end, because again, I'm telling people don't go crazy and jack up your reserve. That is not what the intent is here. Any questions?
What
on
is
that?
the intent?
If I could just
It's a very common
add
question that we
something
get.
to that.
great question.
So the employee benefits accrued liability, that's really like future, like if I separate from the district. This is more teacher, you look at teachers, custodians, clerical. What's the probability that that unit's gonna use their sick time during the year? So teachers might be 20% likely to use their days. So we have to look at, they earn 500 sick days. They're gonna use 20% of that. What is that liability? Custodials might only use 5%. So what's that liability? Because we're still paying them their sick time, even though in the future, when they separate, we wouldn't be paying that specific amount. So I don't know if that helps.
Who's coming up with those estimates? You mentioned like this is all like a reasonable amount that you have to allocate.
Sure. So what we're planning to do in conjunction with the district is to look historically. So we're going to look for example, for 25 and 24, what has everyone earned, which a report generates that across the entire district, and what have they used, and we'll apply that percentage. Again, to be super clear here, it is a long-term estimate. It is inherently an estimate. It's not meant to be precise. Unless you can see into the future, you're never going to have a perfect number. So it's just, again, it is an estimate, and it is a long-term estimate on your government-wide. It's not affecting your fund level. So I don't want people losing sleep over it, but we will be reactive to this requirement per GASB to the point of why are we doing this? They're asking for consistency here. We've made this joke multiple times. We don't think this is going to create consistency. It's actually going to create inconsistency, but we're all going to work through it together. It'll be fine. The district is prepared to run the reports that we need, and we'll all get to the end game together. So all good there. Moving forward to GASB statement number 103. So this is for next year. Again, this is another one intended to create consistency. I'm not sure that it will, but again, as it's so named, financial reporting model improvements, right? It's trying to make those voluminous financial statements, upwards of 80 pages, something that's more tangible to a reader, especially to a layman reader who is not in this world and understanding everything that's there. Again, I make the joke constantly, but of an 80-page financial statement, there's probably 5 pages that people actually want to read and are deriving value from. The rest, not so sure. Keeps me employed, whatever. So in terms of what I think will be the most important thing to all of you, there's a schedule at the back of your financial statements, a supplemental schedule that historically has shown your original voter-adopted budget, an amended budget after all your budget transfers throughout the year, and then it shows your actual numbers. There's always been a variance that's shown there. Now what GASB is asking is that there's, with again a subjective materiality determination, there's going to be explanations as to why things are different, right? So if you're going from your original budget, making a budget transfers throughout the year, if you're comparing your original budget to your amended budget, they want some sort of explanation as to what changed and why those transfers were needed. Similarly, if you're looking at your final budget, and again, after those budget transfers and your actual numbers throughout the year, why is something more or less than your budget? So again, without a crystal ball, it's hard to say what's gonna ultimately need to be explained. Again, it's very subjective. The district can elect to explain more or less. Many people have mentioned that they're gonna try to be generic there because you don't wanna you don't want to give out the secret behind the sauce. But again, what I would say to people is, to the extent that you know that your budget might have areas where you know there's gonna be a bunch of budget transfers in or out, just be prepared to speak about that. So again, you have effectively a year to just think ahead to what will be important for us to want to tell a story, right? There's a narrative that you can tell with a financial statement, especially for someone who's actually making it to page 75 and looking through all of that. So how will you tell that story for, here's what we budgeted and why, here's what it changed to, here's what actual performance looked like, et cetera. So just be prepared for that.
So this is for all budget transfers that happen throughout the year, which we already, or is it for the ones specifically that happen after the books close on June 30th?
Yeah, let me explain that a little differently.
Okay.
So if you look at that schedule, there's gonna be all of your functional classifications, so instruction, transportation, benefits, et cetera. So at that level, whatever those fluxes look like between those captions, that's what you'll want to explain. You're not individually explaining, I did 50 transfers.
Fantastic, okay,
Correct.
wonderful. That's
It's important to note too that Chris mentioned this, so the GASB itself speaks to significant changes. They don't define what's considered significant. So again, as Chris mentioned, we can work with the district to come up with what we feel makes sense in terms of what's gonna drive which fluctuations we do have to explain.
Okay,
So if you did something where you added debt service, you would see a change. You
Correct.
might say this year, we did an energy performance contract and we have additional debt. So you'd want to tell a story that that's what we did this year. Kind of like our budget process, how
I
we
was gonna
say
say
to
that we
people,
already do this already,
this is
it
what
seems
we're
to me,
planning,
yes.
and then at the end of the year, we would say, this is what we had planned to do. We put resources towards students' mental health or something like that. So
For a district like you guys, any district that has good, sound budgeting practices, like this shouldn't be that big of an ask. Like you're not gonna have to describe anything out of the norm that's gonna kind of shine a light on you guys as being like, why did they mess that up in the original budget? But districts that don't have good budgeting practices, now they're gonna be forced to essentially put some sort of an explanation in their financial statements as to why they had to make this budget transfer, why they had to, under budgeted on this line versus another, so.
I was just thinking of it as an audit committee, we made a recommendation to the Board of Education about a resolution that was suggested by the auditors, that when we close our books, that, you're able to make transfers, right, after that time, and it may be that you don't have the resolution from the board first, it will come later, but you have this, and this would further explain some of this also if there were major shifts and swings. The board approved it for us to do this year. They were uncomfortable in approving it for the following years and putting that as a regular practice. If this is in place, I was just wondering, does this make them feel more comfortable so that if at the end of the year, again, a transfer is gonna go through after June 30th, and if it was, for some reason, some wide gap of, $500,000 in a category of transportation, number one, it's still gonna show up on a resolution that the board's going to approve, but number two, under this reporting, there will be some sort of explanation that shows at end of year you were here and this is happening, right? I mean, would that align? I'm just thinking of ways that would make the board more comfortable with the resolution, and I don't know if I'm going the right way on this or if I'm not.
It's not specifically related to transfers that are happening after year end or the
No,
close.
I know that, I
It's-
just didn't know if something shows up after year end that looked like a massive, but it's not going to, so, okay.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna
because
okay.
typically, it would be like salary to salary code or
Okay.
things. This
During
could
the
be
code.
It's
things
during,
where-
yeah,
What you're talking about is not this.
no, I get that, I just was seeing if we could work it in, because I'm like,
Right,
I'm
right,
trying to make
So
someone
this year,
comfortable.
we had the fuel tanks, the oil
Right,
fuel
right,
tanks.
right.
That was something that was unplanned. So we had a resolution to use some of our undesignated
Correct.
fund balance to cover that. We would explain that here, that this emergency came up,
Correct.
and this is why this changed. So
Correct.
it's really
That's that.
amendments to the budget.
I got it. I just, again, I'm trying to think of a way to make it more
This would
comfortable.
answer the question that we were asked last night, even more
Where's the
clearly by a
variance?
community.
Right, of course, yes,
community
yes.
comment, right, about where's the
100%.
extra money coming from and where did you under budget or over budget? So
Correct.
this would kind of give that overall, so, but it's an overall,
Yeah,
in
yeah,
my
yeah.
opinion. It doesn't answer the question you're talking about, which, again, as you pointed out, is because it was a recommendation from our auditors to be able to have the ability for the district to make the transfers by June 30th, which is what.
The year end, yes.
In relation to the year-end, exactly. We see
Exactly,
that
yes.
in a lot of districts, that's covered.
But, you know, it was just uncomfortable for the board because we don't have the actual amount, we're just speculating. So
Yes.
we're approving a speculation, right?
Correct.
But it's kind of based on the timing of when the meeting is and June 30th and when we're meeting again, but that's a different.
No, I understand. I was just wondering if there's a way to work it in, but there's clearly not, so don't.
So the state hasn't given a definition of materiality, but based on our school district size, is there a benchmark with other districts our size for dollar and percentage? So that at least we're following standard practice across districts?
It doesn't even make mention of materiality to any degree. It just says what you as the government deems significant. So it's very subjective. Technically, you'll have to make that decision. We'll obviously work with you to let you know if we feel that that's proper or if we have any input on there, but our materiality levels vary year to year, depending on the district's activities. So I can't give a roundabout estimate at this point. I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that, but again, very subjective, so.
Yeah, again, I think it's an opportunity for all of you to shape a narrative and tell a story. So to the extent that you want to tell a story in detail, go ahead. If you want to be a little bit less aggressive with that, then go ahead with that as well, right? It's up to you. Of the things that are not value adds, I actually think there is going to be some value add for this, right? Especially with those questions from the taxpayers. It's all right here, right? We're telling you this is what we did and why, and now it's very transparent.
So it's not another schedule, it's just a narrative?
Yes.
It's going to be a bunch of lines explaining the schedule that already exists.
It could be another page in your financial. So you'll have that budget to actual supplemental schedule, which is typically 1 or 2 pages. And then behind that, you're going to have what's called like a footnote to that schedule, where you're going to define all those significant fluctuations and have explanations.
So maybe one more page.
Don is just like, we're
Not much more words for next year.
Next year.
Yeah, we don't have to worry about this for this year. This is 26.
We'll do, like, we'll have to say why we added more to transportation and less to
Right.
whatever
Yes, of course.
salaries.
Yes,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
At the functional level as it shows up in that budget to actual schedule.
Yeah. So any other questions on?
I have a question for something that was mentioned earlier in the presentation. Is that
Sure.
the time? I am not a CPA, so sometimes where I get caught and my questions come up are on a much more cosmic level rather than down in the weeds. Determine our audit strategy. What are different audit strategies and how do audit strategies change? An audit, I mean, your goal as the auditor, again, as somebody who's not a CPA, I would think it's, you know, what's your audit strategy? You're making sure everything's working right and you're looking for fraud. I know that you mean more than that in terms of what do you mean by, what are the different audit strategy roads that you may follow?
It's a great question. So I touched on this a little bit. The first thing I'll say with that is we are required to incorporate some sort of unpredictability in our approach so that districts, business offices can't become familiarized with exactly what we're doing and then knowing what to look for on their end. So we do incorporate, in terms of our selections process, there's going to be some changes. So if we're typically looking at, we're developing a materiality level, and we say for this caption, we're going to look at every transaction that's over that materiality level, we're going to take it a step further and maybe select a couple that are randomly below that to incorporate that level of unpredictability. So that's one thing. In terms of the overall approach, I alluded to this a little bit during the presentation, but you can choose to rely on controls. So if you're going to test the operating effectiveness of certain controls within certain areas, let's look at cash disbursements, right? So your checks leaving the district's door. Typically, we would look at 25 to 40 disbursements. We're going to look at all the controls that should be happening. If we determine that all those controls are functioning properly, we had no issues, we can choose to rely on those controls and reduce some of the year-end substantive testing that Chris alluded to. I mentioned this before because we typically don't do that, just because the way that we structure our audit approaches here and the year-end testing that we're doing, we're pretty much gonna do regardless, so it doesn't make sense for us to rely on controls, but that is an option, so that's one of the things that you can do to adjust what your ultimate audit strategy is. But we're looking at every significant financial statement caption, so whether it's cash, investments, receivables, revenue, payroll, capital assets, for each of those areas, we have to basically determine what we feel the inherent risk is of that area, what the control risk is, as I just said. So typically you can either set your control risk to high and not test controls, or you can test those controls and reduce that level of control risk to moderate or low. And then you're basically coming up with each caption with what we call a risk of material misstatement. What do we feel is the chances that for this area, based on the internal control structure, that there could be a material misstatement made in that area? So each caption, we're developing that risk approach, and it can change year to year, depending on things like we said. If there's turnover, if there's issues in the prior year, we're incorporating that. So for extra classroom, right, we're gonna test a little bit more this year because we had those issues last year. Capital assets, same thing. Like, there are certain things that we have to incorporate to address those issues from the prior year, but all that is getting baked into our overall audit approach. But to your point, yes, the end game is still the same. At the end of the day, we're giving you an opinion that we've gained enough assurance that we feel the financials are not materially misstated at that caption level.
So you can't look at every single thing. So determining an audit strategy is you guys figuring out where to dig. And
That's pretty short and sweet. I'd say that's pretty accurate, correct? Yeah.
So it's almost like risk-based, right?
Exactly,
Like, so
exactly.
like, this is where we feel there's more risk, so we would do more testing there.
Correct.
perhaps.
So we're looking at, again, we came here for interim already. We gained that updating controls understanding. If we felt that a certain area may have more risk this year, we're gonna do more work on that area come year end.
okay, so determining an audit strategy means where you're going to concentrate. Okay,
Sure.
Great, thank you.
That's
That's terrific. All right, cool. Makes sense, thank you.
No, that was a great question.
Any other questions? Anyone?
And sometimes their audit strategy focuses on the OSC's top 10. You know, if they know the OSC is
It's a
looking
great
at
segue.
something.
Yes.
Yeah, so there you go. But that's also, they know other schools have had issues, so they might say, okay, we didn't notice much here, let's just check these things a little.
Exactly. A perfect example is over the last year and a half or so, the comptroller's office has really harped on payroll, which I think you guys just went through actually with the comptroller.
We did
So they've been
very
really
well.
honing in on non-instructional payroll overtime. And do districts have a process for pre-approval of custodians, clerical, of them requesting overtime? So again, that's something that we would incorporate. We'd ask some questions to gain an understanding of what's in place here, just to make sure that we're, hopefully keeping you out of trouble when the OSC does come in, which they have, but knock on wood, I've heard good things from what you all have told me so far, so that's
Yes, so
fantastic.
far.
I'll give an update after this.
Yes.
But yeah, so this top 10 is something that our firm puts together each year. It's essentially a list of the top 10 most prevalent sightings by the comptroller's office for school districts. So this, Chris, I believe, is just through 2024, right? So any reports that the comptroller has issued in 25 would not be reflected in here, but these are essentially the top 10 areas that we see cited in those reports. So 10 being the least most cited, and number 1 being the most prevalent or most cited. So it's a great resource. We always implore our districts to review this, maybe have some internal conversations to make sure that, the controls you guys have in place are covering all of these potential issues. But you'll see some pretty wild things on here occasionally that you would never expect your district to be doing, obviously, but so you can see here, IT is number 2. That's been a hot spot now for a few years with the comptroller's office. Payroll's right up there at number 3, and number 1 for 24 was financial management. So fund balance monitoring, do you have a fund balance and reserves plan, things like that. So they've been looking into that as well. Any questions or comments on the top 10 or anything else in general?
Very helpful, I really like this. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great resource, for sure.
So if I could just give an update on the OSC, we actually did our response to the OSC report, and it's gonna be sent back today. And I know I shared with everyone, there was no comment on it. So that should be coming out to the public within the next month or so. I'm sure it'll be cover of Newsday.
Fantastic.
Now that we've had it at our meeting, yes,
Congratulations.
Congratulations, it was an excellent
Job
report,
well
so
done.
It
yes.
was really, and they did kind of similar to your strategy. They cast a wide net
Right,
and looked at different things like our technology, our overtime,
Overtime.
everything they looked at, our food service, right? And they didn't find anything there, and they said, let's look at payroll. And they had no comments, which was really impressive. So
Congratulations
Yeah,
to the
good
entire
job.
department.
yeah, it's
All of you.
wonderful.
Yeah, I will say, just to comment one thing, payroll being such a massive area too, I think it is almost next to, I don't know if I've ever seen another district have a full intensive review done by the comptroller's office over payroll and not have any sort of findings or recommendations, so that's incredible.
Bravo.
that's Teresa.
Well done. Excellent. Are there any other questions regarding this? I do want to keep you all in the room for just a second because we like to plan for next year just a little bit. And in looking at the calendar and our meeting schedule, October 7th is our current board meeting. That's when we have it slated, which is pretty early in the month. That's typically when you all would come and present. How does that work for your schedule as far as having everything prepared? Do we need to look at moving that meeting? Because then
October 7th is the board meeting,
the board meeting.
so could we back into when the audit committee meeting
So
would be?
then, that's my next question. I'm looking at either October 1st or September 17th. As, I think September will be too early.
Probably
Is it-
too
no, not
early.
Jesus.
October 1st sounds much
Oh,
more.
October 1st, wait, October 1st is a
board-
Wednesday. I thought, no, Jewish holidays are on Thursday, I thought.
Wait,
Or that's
the board meeting is what, October 7th?
No, but Yom Kippur, it's
It's
not.
on October 1st.
Wait, but that might be Erev Yom Kippur.
Oh.
Yeah, it's Erev, so we're okay. We can still, yes, I know what I'm doing. Okay.
I don't know, it's
You're
just y'all-
Greek, and we're,
I'm worried about you.
Thank
I will
you.
be here.
so we could look at, or we can look at a different time in October. I was just looking at Wednesdays that seem to be days that worked well for the committee in the past, or we can even, but we can look at any other day before the 7th, is, of course, if you want to look within October. Do you think, what are we thinking as far as time-wise?
The initial September 17th seemed a little too
Yeah, it's way
Yes.
early, so yeah, I think anything that week prior to October 7th, I mean, if you guys want to go with that Wednesday, the 1st, I think that's reasonable.
Okay, unless I'm wrong, but I think, I just looked at it, it's Erev Yom Kippur, so we have the school off on the 2nd is when we have school off.
On October 2nd.
On October 2nd, we have school off for Yom Kippur, but October 1st, we are still in session. So if nobody has a problem with that, then we can do our meeting on the 1st. That is usually a longer meeting. It goes for about a couple hours, hour and a half. I'm just looking around the room. Yes, we think that's gonna be okay.
I wouldn't be at that date. October 1st doesn't work for me.
Oh, that doesn't work for you?
You can go ahead without me.
Okay, all right, well, we'll see what happens, yes. But if it works for the majority sitting in the room too, right, so far? Okay. Emily won't be there because this is her last meeting, we'll talk about that also, yes, but, okay, so
I
good.
just might come as a community member.
I could consider the 6th, we can consider the 6th.
6th work better, like Monday the 6th.
If you have to make a revision, is that too close?
We don't,
Or we don't make
typically.
revisions? at-
Last year, I think we came to the audit committee in draft form, right?
Yes, you did, you
And
come
then
in
we
after draft
final,
form,
so-
yeah.
Unless we're talking major revisions that we can turn around and.
Yeah, it should be.
We
it
can
should be
pencil
fine.
it in as the 6th, if it's looking like we're gonna need, I mean, you all will have a better sense, I don't think we will
I
have.
don't think we've ever had a revision.
Let's not jinx it though. Let's
All
not.
right.
You don't know who's on this committee next year.
Yes.
Because you're coming a week later than last year.
I was
That's
thinking more for, do we typically bring or mail copies of all the reports for the board, physical?
Yes. We put it in the
We
packet.
put it,
Yeah.
So we would need
and
to make sure.
we do a printout for the 7th. The 7th, we
Yeah.
do an abbreviated,
But I can print them out. They don't, I mean, it doesn't have to be bound.
no, it doesn't have to be bound at all,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
You can print
Gotcha.
them.
Yeah. no,
You
that's
could
not a
always
problem.
send the bound ones to us, like maybe flyers.
We can do it
I like
after the fact,
little
okay.
thing that goes on there.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be
Feels
bound for the
efficient.
board. It doesn't need to be bound for the board, it's not a problem.
So we'll pencil in the 6th?
So I think the
That
6th,
That would be better for us, just because there's so much that goes into the audit that we're still getting, believe it or not, like different bills and liabilities and stuff. It's just more.
This is why we sit in this room and have this discussion. So yes, the 6th,
Yeah.
that,
Even if
does that
we
work
have
for the group?
numbers,
It's going to be a
they
Monday
have
now,
to
it's the same issue? Okay. Is that good?
Any particular reports that come in later that you're concerned about? Like, I know OPEB is sometimes late, cap assets can be late, just to make sure that everyone's comfortable with the state.
Yeah, nothing in particular, I just think it should be
Okay.
as late as possible.
Yeah.
It's just an extra week to hash out
It'll take a couple
GASB
days.
101 too.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Okay, so then, just also, not that you're necessarily needed for this, but just to go through the year-end glance, we only have 5 meetings that we schedule. I do think we should keep the September 17th meeting. That's like a 10-minute meeting. We have to swear in new members, we set our plan for the year, we just kind of have to do our business, and then we're done. That's September 17th. We have October 6th, which is the meeting with the auditors, and then we have, you don't worry about the board meeting. January 28th, typically that's when we deal with our internal controls, and we have, oh my God, her name is escaping me for some reason. Maura, come in, thank you, I just see the M. Come in and give us a presentation. April 15th, we meet with our internal auditors, and then June 17th, these are all Wednesdays. June 17th, to go ahead and have this kind of rehash meeting, then again, and just know the timeline and understanding.
You're still on. I'm trying to get it. Oh,
Does,
we're
she's
in
okay.
person. Oh,
Are we okay with that kind of concept? I kind of left the framework as it was last year. It seemed Wednesdays worked well, 9 o'clock in the morning, and tried to schedule in and around the same kind of pattern. That looks good so far. We can always change if we need to. All right, and I've worked with breaks and everything. Okay, with that being said, I want to thank you all for your very thorough presentation and providing us this insight, the work that you're doing on site. We look forward to hearing even more about it in the coming months. I'd like to also publicly thank Jim. This is his official last meeting for the audit committee, and you have served, I don't even know, you were here before I got here. I know it's been decades, has it not? And I personally, for me, you have been such an insightful asset to our audit committee, asking really thoughtful questions, taking us down directions that others have not, that have been very helpful directions, and have really shed a lot of light on the process, and have found you most valuable in helping us really establish this committee, continuing to move it forward and providing us insight. So I'm excited that we may see you again still at the table, but I'm saddened to say that unfortunately for this year, your term is ending. But I've enjoyed working with you so much, and I really appreciate it. And congratulations on your graduate this year, and all of the good things that you have coming forth too. So thank you for being a member. I'm also going to say thank you to Ms. Bays, who is not only finishing up her term as a Board of Education member, but also on the audit committee. It's been a real thrill, hasn't it?
Yes.
You could still be on it. Why didn't you?
She could have applied, but she didn't. Unlike Jim, she does not have the desire of audit running through her blood like the rest of us. Yes, so
It's just
it's not as exciting as I
I
do.
do want to say something, because I have to say, I'm finishing my 9th year on the board. And when I first started the Board of Education, the audit committee was not like this. And I really want to talk and give you lots of credit, Julie, because you've made it a very different type of committee. And I always cringed at the thought of audit. And I have to say, and I'm going to say it again, and I told Sandra when she first joined the board, this is the most important committee, which is, by the way, the only committee that is required by law. And it has me not being a numbers person, so I'm even worse than Nico. I don't even know what Nico was asking. But me being worse than that, have really understood the process and understood the value. And I do think, again, leaving, that any new board member should be sitting on this committee. And I think it's a value. It does really, we do all the real work here, so I appreciate and I thank all of you for that.
Yes, and thank you
And
also.
Julie makes it so much
She
fun.
does, she
You.
makes it so
I love
much
it.
fun.
I love it. This and budget, my 2 favorite ones, say yes. But, and I want to thank our staff this year, Ruth, your copious notes and everything that you've done, and keeping us on track and sending out our reports. Jessica and Donna and Kathy for always keeping us above board and on task and helping, and the rest of your office and support staff. You guys have always come in prepared with the answers and helping guide us and directing us and working through a lot of this. So we really do appreciate it. And with that, I'm going to make a motion to recess to executive session so that we can choose applicants for the final years. And do I? No, not yet, wait,
I'll
no.
second.
The second is by Emily Bays, and do we have to take a vote? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you can 7, so we have 7-0. And so with that, the motion carries, and we thank you all. Our guests and Jim can adjourn themselves, and we'll move into executive session with no hopes of returning.